Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for the School Facility Planning webinar. My name is Claudia Quesada and I'm in the Innovation of Incubation Office for the Chicago Public Schools. Here with me today are Bibi Novich, Senior Manager for Renovations for the CPS Department of Facilities, Stephen Valenciano, Assistant Zoning Administrator with the Bureau of Zoning, and Hal Hutchinson, Assistant Commissioner for the City of Chicago Department of Buildings. We are here today collectively to provide you with the necessary tools and information to guide you when identifying a location for a viable school option. And additionally, to assist you as you plan a renovation for your existing school, for those of you that are open already. You will especially find this information crucial as you are going through the City of Chicago zoning approval process and Department of Buildings review. After the presentation concludes, you will have the ability to submit questions regarding the webinar via the chat function on the YouTube video. All questions submitted will be answered and shared with you as an FAQ via email, and also will be posted on the CPS website to be used for future reference. Please feel free to share this information with your colleagues. We really want to ensure this information is widely distributed, and we strongly believe that this will assist in identifying any hurdles early on. Let's get started. Currently, Chicago Public Schools is running 3 separate requests for proposals, or RFPs. One for charter and contract schools, one for options, and a middle school's high school early intervention RFP. Keep in mind that Tier 1 proposal submittals are due on April 8th. Tier 2 is August 10th for the traditional and options RFP. For those interested in the middle school's RFP, you will have until May 4th to submit your full proposal. All proposals for the 3 separate RFPs will be voted on the October Chicago Board of Education board meeting. If you have any facility-related questions during this time frame, please feel free to reach out to myself. My contact information will be shared with you at the end of the presentation, or Jessica Rufino Perez, Incubation Manager. Now on to Bibi to discuss the CPS facility approval process.
Thanks, Claudia. I'm going to talk about how you and CPS should work together to make sure your facility approval process goes as smoothly as possible, including your approval process through the city. The CPS Facilities Department works very closely with the Department of Innovation and Incubation all the time, with new schools coming online and with current schools when they have facility needs, to try to get you the best guidance that you can get as you're going through facility renovations and choices. The requirements I'm going to talk about are applicable, as Claudia pointed out, in the process of starting up a new campus, and once you're authorized, or if you already are authorized for other campuses, whenever you plan any relocations or renovations in the future. The important theme for all of this is we require that we have early review of your facilities, and it's to your benefit as well as ours. We do this in part, of course, to ensure the safety and well-being of our children, but we also do this to assist you, and not to be an intrusion or a hindrance, but to actually give you the benefit of our many years of experience in choosing facilities and in renovating facilities. We have lots of experience doing all this, probably in the city of Chicago, probably more than anyone else, and we want to help guide you through this process as quickly as you can get through it. Here's the procedure we'd like to follow. We don't want to be overly bureaucratic, so it may vary from situation to situation depending on the size of a building or the complexity of it, but this is the general scheme. The first thing is we want to review your designs, and we want you to share your information about your design very early in the process and very thoroughly, so we can have full information about what you plan to do. The first thing you should do is fill out an architect's inspection form and an ADA report, and those documents are available from the Department of Innovation and Incubation. That'll help get us started knowing what we're dealing with. But then it's best to meet with us And my best advice would be to bring this stuff to us very early in the process at the conceptual design phase so that we can talk with your architects and get a sense of what your needs are and what your plans are. I would suggest you do this at least 6 to 9 months in advance of either when you're going to open the campus or when you plan to have your renovations complete. One pitfall to avoid is you may not think you have a complex renovation coming up, but the building code may actually require your renovation to be more complex than you're expecting. So even if you don't think it's that complex a renovation, get talking to us early in the process. The 6 to 9 month phase is the best, so that we can make sure you know about all the possible requirements. It's also a good idea to meet early with the city, with the Zoning Bureau, Department of Buildings, and the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities who review for accessibility. You can do a pre-plan with, I believe, all those departments, and that's the best way you can know what your requirements are before you've gone too far into the design process. I believe was sent out to you with this deck of slides is there's a document called ADA guidance that I wrote some years ago, but it's still relevant, and that can help you know some of the more technical requirements of the ADA and at least applicability to different kinds of schools and different kinds of situations. It also applies to option schools programs, even though those aren't in the title. After we get to review your designs, we're going to assign an architect who will review your designs and go through and try to spot any issues that might be of concern. Once you're close to construction, we're going to assign what we call either a construction manager or a project director, just to act as liaison between you and CPS. They'll help keep CPS informed so you don't have to do that all the time, and they can also try to head off some issues that they may be able to foresee. And then finally, when you're close to finished with construction, we'll probably want to do some kind of site visit just to make sure everything is in line and to help you anticipate any issues for inspection. What we'll be looking for during these reviews, first and foremost, is compliance with all applicable codes, especially life safety codes and legal codes, legal requirements like the ADA. But we're also going to look for things that are more for the purpose of guidance to you, and that's your building condition overall and the operational capacity of you to deal with that building in later years. We will take a look at what your intended population and program size are and try to give you some ideas of what capital investments you're going to need in the future, whether this facility is going to meet your needs now and later, and any other kind of guidance that you might need. And we may ask for some additional documents from time to time to help that kind of inquiry. Now I'm going to turn this over to representatives from the Bureau of Zoning and Department of Buildings who have graciously given their time to help train everybody here, including us, in how best to get through this process. And we really appreciate their time in devoting their time just to our charter schools and our option schools that are coming online. I'm going to turn it over to Steve Valenziano from the Bureau of Zoning and then Hal Hutchinson from the Department of Buildings. Steve?
Hi. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Department of Planning and Development's zoning review process. For most schools, you're going to come in and you're going to need a building permit application, and part of that building permit application process is a zoning review. So the first thing we're going to look at is the use classification. And all the schools, whether they're concepts, whether they are option schools or charter schools or middle schools, they're all classified by the Chicago zoning ordinance as a school, and they'll be treated as such. So what you need to do first is you need to go on to the city's zoning map site, which is cityofchicago.org/zoning map, and you would enter the address of the facility where you intend to go, and then you would click on the Identify button and click on the property that you've chosen to find the designation. Once you know that designation, then we do a land use review. So and you should look at this the same way, because the land use, the school use is either a permitted use in the residential districts, the R and DR districts, or it is a special use and is allowed only through review by the Zoning Board of Appeals in the commercial, the business, downtown core, and downtown mixed use and service districts. It's a prohibited use in the manufacturing, the planned manufacturing districts, the parks and open space districts, and the T districts in the city, which are the transportation districts. Once you determine whether the location where you are choosing to site the school is if the use is permitted there or not, or allowed there or not, then we need to have a parking determination done for the school based on the size and operations of the school. You would submit that request to the Department of Planning and Development, the Bureau of Zoning and Land Use, in room 905 at City Hall. Once you have determined that the use is appropriate or allowed in the district where you want to put it, and you have that parking determination, then you can either you need a zoning denial letter if you are in one of the business or commercial districts. You can get that one of two ways, either part of the corrections that would be issued as part of a building permit review, or you could come into the department in room 905 and get on a list and meet with a staff member to go over the application and give you this denial letter. This denial letter will then let you enter the Zoning Board of Appeals application process. And that is typical for most schools. Most of these schools operate in business and commercial districts and would require the special use. If you're in a residential district, in a traditional school building in a residential district, then this process would not be necessary. However, in most cases it is necessary. So once you have your zoning certification denial, then you can go to the zoning board and pick up an application that is also located in room 905, or you can go online and print out an application and bring it in. With the application, we're going to want some basic information about the project. We want to know, well, of course, where it's at, the zoning of the site, the type of operation, if it's a middle school, if it's a option school, the number of faculty and staff, and the number of students. We're also going to want proof of public notice that you sent out the notice that's required, which staff will help you with that. And also consent from the property owner that you have the authority to file for a special use at that property. You also have to fill out the economic disclosure statements, and then we would need some preliminary drawings. So if you're not already in the full building permit process with your full building permit plan set, then the conceptual drawings, architectural drawings, site plans, and surveys are what you would bring in at that time. So then once we have the application, you would then come in and all the materials, you would come in and meet with the Zoning Board of Appeals staff. They would make sure that the application is complete, and they would tell you anything else that you might need to know, your next steps, and what you need to do before your hearing date is set. Once everything is in and is complete, then the board would then put you on an agenda. And you would have a hearing date. The hearings are the third Friday of every month, and you would appear before the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the applicant needs to be necessary. It needs to be appear at the hearing, and you also have to have a certified planner or land use appraiser, and also they have to testify on your behalf to the criteria for approval of a special use. At that hearing, any objectors or any supporters from the community that the notice is sent out to, they can come and they can also testify or cross-examine any of your witnesses. At the end of the hearing, the zoning board, which is a five-person panel, they will deliberate and vote on all of the cases at the very end of the hearing. Then they will come out and read the results of the votes. Those votes are then posted the following Monday on the department's website to tell you if you passed or failed at the zoning board, if you got the special use. If there are no objectors to your use or to your application at the zoning board, then you can proceed through the building permit process with just a handwritten consent from the zoning board staff. If there were objectors, then you have to wait till the official resolution is signed by the chairman of the zoning board, which takes another month. This is usually issued at the following zoning board of appeals hearing. The zoning board of appeals process takes approximately 60 to 90 days, depending on the caseload of the zoning board and depending on the notification process that you have to go through for the hearing. So it's best to come in early and get this done early. It's one of the most common problems that we see with schools is that they wait till the last minute to come in and get their zoning board, their special use application taken care of. So once you're done with that process, then you can then proceed right back to the plan process if you're already in it, or you can now enter the Department of Buildings building permit process, and your zoning review would be much quicker then because you've already taken care of the zoning board process. And with that, I would turn it over to Hal.
Thank you for inviting the Department of Buildings to this presentation. The Department of Buildings provides several resources for architects, and I'm going to describe just a few of them. The Chicago Building and Zoning Codes are available for free online at AM Legal. The Department of Buildings has a website with a great deal of information on the inspectional and the building permit processes, and that's cityofchicago.org/buildings. The Department of Buildings Code Clarification Desk is available by appointment for short meetings at City Hall once a week. Appointments can be requested at dobcorrections@cityofchicago.org. You can email the Department of Buildings with specific code questions or questions about self-cert eligibility. My email is hal.hutchinson@cityofchicago.org. Next slide. There are 4 building permit processes for schools, and they include developer services, standard plan review, self-certification, and the green permit process. Developer services is for new buildings and large additions. Technical reviews are performed by third-party consultants, and the permit process lasts about 90 days. Standard plan review is for additions and alterations. Technical reviews are performed by city staff. The permit process lasts about 60 days. Self-certification can be used for school alterations with no change of use. The architect of record performs the technical reviews if they are registered as a self-cert architect. And finally, the green permit process must be used if there are green technologies included in the scope of work, such as green roofs or solar panels. Green permits get an expedited permit process and a few other benefits. You can find that information, more information about the green permit process on our website. Next slide. Building permit inspections. All building permits require inspections by the Department of Buildings inspectors. The general contractor must request all inspections online at the Department of Buildings website. Next slide. E-Plan is the Department of Buildings electronic permit process. The architect is the applicant and submits all documents online. No appointment is required. Part of the permit process includes certified plan corrections. Certified plan corrections are mandatory for standard plan review. The architect is expected to address the corrections and revise the plans after one complete review for each discipline. This excludes the disciplines of zoning, fire, and structures. Next slide. Rehabilitation code. The rehabilitation code may be relevant if using an existing space with minor alterations and an occupancy change. In the rehabilitation code, each occupancy type is assigned a hazard rating or index. Increasing the hazard index will trigger specific life safety upgrades to the buildings. Next slide. Schools are classified as assembly occupancies and subclassified further into school types. Most option schools will be type 1B schools. These are not business occupancies, as Steve pointed out. The occupancy load factors for schools are, for classrooms, it's calculated at 20 square foot per occupant, and for open plan schools, it's calculated at 30 square foot per occupant. Next slide. According to the Chicago Building Code, all buildings are classified according to their construction type. Construction types identify the fire resistance of primary structural components. Type 1 is the most fire-rated construction type. Type 4 is the least fire-rated construction type. Construction types affect the height and area limitations for schools, for all buildings. Height and area limitations for schools vary based on the building's construction type. Note that new school buildings and school additions typically involve Type 1 construction, and existing buildings altered to become schools typically involve Types 2 through 4 construction. As the fire resistance of a building increases, so does the allowable height and area of the building. Next slide. Key enclosures and separations include classrooms not exceeding 300 persons require a 1-hour enclosure. Classrooms exceeding 300 persons require a 2-hour rated enclosure. Public corridors require a 1-hour rated enclosure. Next slide. The number of exits for schoolrooms increases with the occupant capacity of the room. For example, 50 persons or less require 1 exit. Up to more than 1,000 persons requires 4 exits. Next slide. The exit width and capacity of conventional schools is 100 persons per unit of exit width for stairs and 115 persons per unit of exit width for doors. Open plan schools is a little less, perhaps 15% less. A unit of exit width is 22 inches. A half a unit of exit width is 12 inches. Next slide. Fire alarms. Type 1B schools over 1 story in height must have a Class 1 fire alarm system. A Class 1 fire alarm system is a general alarm triggered by pull stations that cause an immediate evacuation of the entire building. Fire alarm shop drawings are submitted to the Department of Buildings for approval after the building permit has been issued. Next slide. Sprinkler systems. A full sprinkler system is required for multi-story school buildings. Installing a sprinkler system in a building will allow an increase in the allowable area and a 1-hour reduction in separation partitions. Sprinkler shop drawings are submitted to the Chicago Fire Department for approval after the building permit is issued. Next slide. Option school case study. Here we have an existing Type 3C building that was selected for an option school. The building is much larger than the allowable area for schools with this construction type. As a result, the architect added a mixed-use occupancy separation to isolate the school from the unneeded area. Additionally, the building was fully sprinklered to increase the allowable school area. Next slide. This is an example of the building I was referring to, showing the demised area with the occupancy separation. So essentially, they created a mixed-use occupancy. Half the building is considered a school, and the other half is probably going to be used for mercantile or business use. Next slide. Frontage requirements. School buildings require frontage on open spaces for emergency, first responders, and fire trucks and firefighting. Next slide. Finally, natural light. Classrooms and student spaces require natural light. Windows and skylights are acceptable sources of natural light. Classrooms require a minimum of 6-foot candles of natural light at 36 inches above the floor. And that's all.
Thank you so much for this great information. Now we're going to open it to questions and answers. Here up in front of you, you have the key resources and contacts. The primary information is myself, I'm Claudia Quesada, my incubation manager, Jessica Rufino Perez, and BB Novich, who is the senior manager and for renovations for Chicago Public Schools. Additionally, we provided you with multiple links for the City of Chicago resources. We really hope that you and your staff use this information as you're identifying possible buildings and as you're planning any renovations for existing schools. Many of you submitted questions to our office, and now we're going to open it up for questions and answers. I'm going to first go over the questions that were submitted to our office, and then if you have any question that hasn't been addressed during the presentation, please feel free to upload your question via the YouTube chat. So the first question that we have is there a suggested square footage for school size? Anybody?
Well, it depends on the building type. So what the programmatic needs of the school is, whether it's 4,000 square feet or 6,000 square feet, that could determine the building construction type of the existing building or space that you're looking for. So maybe you'd like to stay within or under those limitations for the construction type. So you balance the programmatic requirements against the building stock that you're using to select the ultimate location for the school.
I think what really is important for you to keep in mind is that your curriculum and your own programmatic needs are really going to drive what your square footage needs are going to be as you're looking for a facility. If you have a very unique program that requires more open space, that'll really factor into how much or how big of a building that you're going to be looking for. If you do have any unique needs, please feel free to reach out to myself or BB, and we will help guide you as much as possible. Is there any documentation anywhere that will provide facility requirements? I think what you need to do is make sure you use the resources that we provided you with. As CPS is concerned, we want to make sure the schools are following City of Chicago ordinances, and that even if you are a program or a middle school model or a unique school model, that you fully understand that you will have to comply with the school regulations. So make sure that you refer to the building code section that refers to schools. Anything else you'd like to
I
add?
think that's right. The only hard and fast requirements for schools, facility-wise, is that they comply with Chicago Building Code, any Bureau of Zoning requirements, and any other codes that apply, like the state codes and federal codes.
Thank you. Does the facility need to have more than 2 restrooms?
It possibly may, and that's determined by the occupancy load primarily and the travel distance for the specific school building.
Thank you. What are the open space requirements for facilities leasing from an owner with very limited green space?
As far as there are no open space requirements for schools as far as the zoning ordinance goes, and I don't believe there are any either in the building code. So it would be if CPS or the again the program itself called for it, then that would be where the requirement would come from.
What are the sustainable green initiatives required for permitting if the charter school is leasing from an owner?
Again, there are no green requirements, green building requirements. In most of these cases, if it were a larger planned development, that would go through a much broader rezoning processes for a new school, really a large school of 2 acres or more, then there would be those. But in most of these cases, there would be no requirements for any of the green requirements.
I would like to say there are benefits to using the green permit process, and that's on our website, but it involves a number of things. So buildings with green technologies are expected to use the green permit process.
Okay, thank you. Will we be required to have a city tie-in for fire monitoring for middle schools? And if so, will there be a temporary or TCO issued when the city tie-in process is completed?
If there is a fire alarm system for the school, it will require a direct city tie-in, and that's very important. And regarding a temporary certificate of occupancy, that has to be determined by the Department of Building inspectors and the Chicago Fire Department at the time of the inspection, or around the time of the inspection.
Thank you. Will I need a sprinkler system if I am in a one-story facility?
Typically, you will not need a sprinkler system in a one-story school. However, there are many benefits to sprinklering the building that increase the allowable floor area or the allowable height of the building. So there may be strategic reasons to sprinkler the building.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go on to some questions around zoning. What is the most common zoning problem for a new school?
Again, I think the most common problem is that they don't come in early enough and get the zoning board of appeals process, especially use process, going in place, because that does take some time. And so a lot of times they've already entered the permit process and they're kind of late in the game. They need to open up and they haven't taken that into account, that time constraint into account. So that's what I see the most common problem is.
What would you say is the most difficult zoning problem?
Well, I'd say with the parking requirements, there's parking and drop-off requirements for schools. The parking is based on the number of faculty and staff, and then the drop-off requirements are based on the age and number of students that would be coming to the school. So a lot of times this determination is specific to each specific school. So every one of them the requirement is different for every school, but a lot of times the school can't find, or the applicant can't find that parking on site. So they then would need to go through another special use process that can run simultaneously with the school special use, but for off-site parking if that's needed. So that's probably the biggest problem that they have.
What zoning or occupancy classification should we use for a middle school?
Well, if you can find a building or a space in a residential district, that's probably your best bet, because again, that is permitted by right, so you don't have to go through that extra step, or that extra process going through the zoning board. But otherwise, a business or commercial district or a downtown mixed use or core district are appropriate for schools through the special use process.
They asked for the classification.
The classification would be a school,
Right.
but then the zoning designation or classification would be that residential or commercial designation.
Right, I agree. The occupancy type will be C3. Schools are assembly occupancies. It's C3, it's a school. The subclassification for schools are types 1, 2, and 3. A middle school is a type 1B occupancy.
So regardless of whether you're submitting a proposal for a middle school, an options program, a traditional charter school, or a contract school, you're still going to be zoned and classified as a school. So make sure that you keep that in mind as you're preparing your documentation. Is there a process available for expediting any zoning applications?
Well, I would say we regularly work with CPS on their schools, whether they're, again, ground up new large schools or additions to existing public schools, or even on these smaller school sites. So I would say that, you know, we're open, and we try to work with school applicants to you know, get them onto the zoning board if they need to in an expedited fashion, and also if we need to help them with corrections or understanding corrections. So yes, staff regularly will meet with school applicants.
Yeah, additionally, projects that use the green permit process are eligible for an expedited plan review process.
I think we already addressed the next question, but the next question is around whether or not schools will be required to have loading and drop-off zones like traditional schools.
And typically the answer is yes. Through the parking determination request and letter, that will be a requirement.
Okay, and that'll be reviewed during the parking determination review?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. The next batch of questions are regarding construction permits. This school is interested in knowing when a site-specific project, like a playground, needs to go through the full permitting process.
Well, it depends what's included in the scope of work. If it's just a playground, it may not need a building permit. If there are things like light poles, fences, drinking fountains, then it would require a building permit.
Thank you. What are the triggers that would require a traditional site project to go in for permitting? And I think you just answered this because it gives the example of lighting, when lighting is added to the scope. So anytime that there's lighting involved?
Well, lighting would require, at the very least, an electrical permit, which is a simple, easy permit process. That's a one-day permit. But if there are other items, like landscaping, fences, other structures that have to be engineered other than playground equipment, then it's possible a building permit will be required. And I'll invite architects to contact me if they have questions about permit needs.
It sounds like it's a broader question also. I mean, it's not just the playground or the exterior site improvements. It's also, it's going to be requirements for the interior renovation work. There will be a requirement for permit for that.
Certainly, I agree.
Okay. If a site requires DWM permitting, does it necessarily need to go through traditional permitting?
Department of Water Management permitting?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not sure what types of permits they're talking about, but there are, Department of Water Management does issue water disconnects and water tap permits through the Department of Buildings on the 9th floor of City Hall. It does not necessarily have to be hand in hand with a building permit.
Okay. When applying for building permit, can the architect self-certify the plans to expedite the permitting?
Some projects, some school projects may be eligible for the self-certification program, which requires the architect be registered with the self-cert program by taking a class, a 3-day class. And the certification is good for a 5-year period. And that would apply, in terms of schools, that would apply to schools that are doing interior alterations where there is no change of occupancy. So self-certification project would not be appropriate for a building that is occupied by a law firm or a business or mercantile use, and someone wants to change the occupancy to become a school. That would not be allowed. If it's a school and you're doing alterations to the school, that could possibly be eligible for the self-cert program.
Thank you. There's some questions around the length of the approval process. I think we already covered that during the presentation. But the next question is regarding landscape. Would there be a landscaping requirement? And if so, will that review process be expedited?
Typically, well, the landscape review process is done as part of the zoning plan review process. And if there's a parking lot involved, if it's a new parking lot that's being installed, then yes, there will be landscape requirement. If it's an existing parking lot, then we would look at fencing requirements at the perimeter of the existing parking lot, and any parkway or street trees that would be required. So it would be a pretty limited landscape review, I think, in most of these cases, and it would just take place as part of the normal zoning review.
Steve, what changes to a building will trigger landscape requirements?
If you're doing work in the building that would be over 150% the estimated cost of the work would be more than 150% of the assessed value of the property, then the ordinance says that the landscape ordinance then apply, the landscape section of the ordinance then applies. And typically, again, that is putting in street trees if there aren't any already located in the parkway, or if there is parking lot work. Again, there may be some requirements within the parking lot based on that 150% assessed value standard.
I thought there was also a requirement if you change the footprint of the building, for instance, put an elevator addition on or something.
It depends on the size of the addition, that could kick in other requirements, but again, for most of these, it's going to be a pretty limited landscape requirement, I would think. It's usually if you're doing large additions, whole building additions, or building from the ground up.
Okay, the next question is around renovations. Will there be an exception to, it says to the what, for the specific timelines for improvements, on the specific timelines for improvements?
I'm not sure what the question's asking.
Well,
What?
there's no express permit for schools. However, our departments recognize the critical nature and timelines for construction and school calendars. And we try to give them attention, but there's no express program for a school unless it's using the self-certification program.
I think what's important to note here is to ensure that you're working with your architect early on, with your licensed architect early on, to have the drawings in place and to have the proper reviews done before your project way before your project starts. Typically we have some schools doing renovations in buildings where there's existing schools, so the meat of the project happens over the summer. And this is going to require proper planning, sufficient planning on your side, but also engage CPS as soon as possible. We're here to help you. One of the questions that we received is, what do we need to do to make a B31 zoned building into a school?
Well, a B31 zoned building you would have to go through the Zoning Board of Appeals process that I described earlier. So again, if you're in the very early stages where you have just conceptual architectural drawings, maybe you have your site plan, your floor plans, and any elevations of the building complete, then you could come in with those, sit down with staff, get your zoning certification denial letter, and start that Zoning Board of Appeals process at that time. And then by the time you're done with that, you may have your full set of drawings to go through a full building permit review process and get into the system. But the B31 would require a special use.
Okay, thank you. And what is required regarding parking? So it's the same thing that...
Well, okay, so parking, it's the parking determination you have to get. So you submit a request to the department and to the Bureau of Zoning specifically, and you would in that letter describe the use, describe the hours, describe the days of the week that it's going to be in session, describe if it's at a night school or day school, whatever. Describe the area that it's in, if it's close to any public transit stations, Metra or CTA. Also describe the number of faculty and staff that would be on site at any one time, the maximum number, and describe the student population, the age of the students, the number of the students, if they're allowed to drive to the school. And basically then the standard is that you need one parking space for every 3 employees, so that's faculty and staff, and then any number of spaces or drop-off spaces that the department deems necessary for the student population. So if you're in a very well transit served location, then that number is going to be much lower. If they're older students and they're not allowed to drive by the rules of the school, again, that number may be very low for a number of extra parking spaces. So it would depend on each individual case.
Would it be helpful for schools to work with their aldermen if they're going to see parking as a potential issue?
Where they would need to work with their aldermen would be for any drop-off spaces that would be required, because typically those can be on site. So if you have the room, if it's a strip mall or something like that they're moving into, and they have room for drop-off spaces on site, then they don't need to bother the alderman's office. If it's going to be a requirement and they have to put those on street in a commercial loading zone, they have to go through the alderman's office to establish that commercial loading zone.
Thank you. The next group of questions are regarding CPS approval, facility approval process. So what is the process of approval for a new school location and the criteria? The criteria was laid out in the RFPs that you responded to, or that you're about to respond to. If there's any other information that's not included there, it's pretty comprehensive, I believe, BB. But if you have any questions outside of what was not included in the RFP, please feel free to reach out to us. What is the process for co-locating in an existing school building? So right now, as you're working on your plans, there is no process. There are no CPS buildings available for co-locations. Yes. You know, you would be responsible for identifying your own facility. That's why we really felt that this webinar was key and crucial for you to have as you're identifying a possible viable school facility. But again, there are currently no CPS buildings available for co-locations. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you. Will CPS, so the next question is around CPS providing assistance in the process, and if the city will provide a liaison to the process.
Well, CPS obviously wants to assist as much as possible, and that's why we're doing this webinar, and that's why if you come to us early in the process, or whenever you come to us, we will look at your plans, try to give you as much benefit of our guidance as we can, and we'll help in any way that we can. The city is not providing a specific liaison, but each department.
We don't provide a specific liaison, but we do, like I said, again, we regularly work with CPS. We understand that these schools have to come online pretty fast, and we try to help out as much as we can. And so we are willing to sit down and meet. You call the department and set up a meeting. If it's great if a CPS representative is there with you, but it's not necessary.
Same with, do you have
Yeah, I agree with Steve. We do have weekly code clarification desk meetings for 15 to 30-minute meetings, usually for specific code issues and not a comprehensive plan review, pre-plan review. But that's you can make an appointment by emailing dobcorrections@cityofchicago.org.
Thank you. Is there a list of previous schools no longer in operation that could be potential locations for future use? Maybe?
As Claudia said, there are no schools being offered right now. Any of the schools that we're offering up as an RFP to be purchased, actually no, charter schools aren't permitted to purchase them. So I guess for the most part the answer to this is no. Right now there is no list.
How many schools are planned to be updated and will require COC building permits?
I'm not sure what the question is.
So if you are planning on going into a building and it's not an existing school, you will require a City of Chicago permit, you'll be required to hire an architect. But if you have buildings that you have in mind that you're interested in, that you're going to be leasing or that you're going to be purchasing, chances are BB or myself have already been to those buildings. So if you have an address, feel free to send us the address, and we'll be more than happy to provide you with any facility information that we have on file for the buildings. So that is all for all the questions that were submitted prior to the webinar. For those of you that are joining us live right now, do you have any other questions that we have not answered as of yet? Okay, the next question is, what is the process for a C1-1 building?
A C1-1 zoning designation would be, again, it would be the same zoning board of appeals process. So you would have to get the special use, appear before the zoning board of appeals, and they would review and approve the application.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We are a little under 10 minutes, so we do have a little bit of time to answer any additional questions. No more questions. So thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be posting the webinar and the FAQ. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.